both of his 50s probably in terms of weight and importance were as good as any 100 will ever be. So Rishabh Pant is probably the biggest winner for me. Moving forward, I think he's a lock in that Indian team. Whether Mitchell Swepson should be the number 10 for Australia in the first test over Nathan Lyon. And yeah, I think we just go from there. But the main point of this is the Shield has to be running, or at least close to test cricket.
It's a miracle! Oh yeah! What about that one? No! Unbelievable! Balotelli, Aguero! Crowd cheers. Here's Siddle. Oh, the ball is close. He's given him. He's given him. Peter Siddle's got a hat-trick on his birthday.
Hello and welcome back to the On Ball podcast. This is episode 100 of the show. I'll be honest, it only just dawned on me that it was episode 100 about 5 minutes ago, so I thought I would chuck on a interesting hat and a tie just to, spice up the kit. In episode 50 we suited up, but not quite that special of an event today. Kind of just pumping one out to get back into the rhythm of it, but I'm sure there'll be more celebrations down the line on this show. Today we're going to be talking about the recent India versus Australia cricket series. We'll probably touch on some other cricket topics depending on how long we talk about India versus Australia for. But yeah, huge series, incredible upset really. India getting up, especially coming into the summer. You probably thought it was going to be a competitive series, but just given the amount of injuries, Virat Kohli having to go back home due to the birth of his child, all those just unfortunate events not that someone having a child is unfortunate, but in terms of on the cricket field, they really had almost an India A side at points of the series, especially in the last test. So for them to come away with the victory is quite incredible. It looked like they were a good chance to retain the trophy, but to go out and actually win it, incredible test victory in Brisbane, probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, in Indian cricket history. And yeah, it was just an incredible display. Yes, a lot of the media is negative towards Australia, but I think a lot of this has to come down to positives towards India, because it can't be, it has to be discussed how well they did considering the lack of options they had at the selection table. So today I'm going to just discuss who are the major winners coming out of this huge test series, who are the big losers as well, both individuals or groups of people. And then I'm going to talk about the main three talking points coming out of this series, which to me is going forward, what is India's best test lineup? Who is next off the, next cabs off the rank for Australia? Who can come in and do a role in the upcoming South Africa series? And how can Cricket Australia fix the current system? Because there are clearly flaws when there's blokes scoring 30s in Big Bash and people are saying pick them in the test team and stuff like that. So we're just going to work our way through that, see how long that takes us, and then that'll basically determine if we talk about anything else. Might touch on a bit of Big Bash at the end. But first of all, biggest winners. I think the biggest winner in my opinion is probably going to be Rishabh Pant. Obviously the whole Indian team had a pretty incredible series, but Rishabh Pant really announced himself onto the scene. From the get-go, really, in his test career, he was almost an instant, overnight sensation. We hear a lot of his chat behind the stumps, and he's quite a lovable character. He's real huggable, which has been a big topic of conversation between me and my mates this weekend. But the way he bats, it's really entertaining, especially in contrast to someone like a Pujara. And yeah, his chirp behind the stumps is always good fun. But he really announced himself as a proper test player in this test series. There were probably a few batsmen short with Kohli going back home. Rahul was injured, so they needed someone else to step up and really help out Pujara and Rahane. And Pant did that. He scored 250s, but both crucial innings. He obviously did it at a pretty fast rate compared to most. He had a strike rate of 70 in the series, but he scored 274 runs, India's top run scorer for the series, and he played one less test than the likes of Pujara and Rahane. So incredible stuff. Average of 68. Sadly didn't get that 100. Got out for 97, but both of his 50s probably in terms of weight and importance were as good as any 100 will ever be. So Rishabh Pant is probably the biggest winner for me. Moving forward, I think he's a lock in that Indian team, whether it's with the gloves or whether it's as a specialist batsman. I think he is someone definitely worth picking at 6, especially if you can sneak a Jadeja or Ashwin in at 7 or 8. Then all of a sudden you've got some pretty good depth with the bat. He's got room to improve on with the gloves, but as Gilly kept mentioning all summer, like that will come with more test experience. Gilly said from his first test to his last, he improved heaps with the gloves, so hopefully Pant can work on that. But even if he's just picked as a specialist batsman, he's shown that he is certainly good enough to do that for this Indian side, and for me, he is the number one biggest winner coming out of this. My second winner of the biggest winner of the series, obviously there are a lot of winners, almost the whole Indian side, and a couple Aussies had great summers, but I'm going to go Shubman Gill. He was India's 4th top run scorer, but he was only 15 runs behind the top run scorer in Pant. He scored 259 runs in 6 innings. He also missed out on that glamorous first test 100 that everyone dreams of, but he scored 2 impressive 50s, and he just looked like a top quality test batsman from his first innings. I watched him in person in Melbourne, and he just looked a different class, really. There was huge debate coming into this series whether they go with Prithvi Shaw, whether they go with Shubman Gill, and after the first test, Shubman Gill came in, and I hate to say it, I don't think Prithvi Shaw's career is over at all. He's still very, very young and a very, very exciting prospect, but Gill, I think, is locked in that spot now for a decade, if not, if he keeps this up. And Shaw's got to fight for another spot throughout that batting lineup, because that opening spot is now being solidified with the great series from Gill. He looks like one for the future. India just seem to keep producing these gun batsmen. Only recently it was really only 1 or 2 a decade, and now this current generation looks like they've got 3 or 4 world-class talents, and they're looking like a pretty scary proposition moving forward. And I think outrageous test victories like Australia in Australia are going to be a lot more frequent for this Indian side with this batting lineup. So here's another big winner from this. I think another big winner, I'm probably going to say more than 3 because it's hard not to mention a lot of these Indian players. I think Ravi Jadeja came out of this series looking real good. He only batted twice, only played in 2 matches, missed out in a couple due to injury and selection reasons, but he averaged 85 with the bat, scored 1 crucial 50 in Melbourne, and he just looked really good, and he also came away with 7 wickets in 37 overs, which is pretty outrageous. Average of 15, strike rate of 32. For a spinner in Australia, that's pretty incredible. We saw how much Nathan Lyon struggled. Ravi Ashwin had a pretty good series, but we've seen how much he's struggled in the past as well. So Jadeja, he's usually just the second spinner that gets rolled in on spinning decks, but for him to come in and really have an influential performance in this series, he was a huge reason why they won that Melbourne Test, in my opinion. And yeah, I just can't, even though he only played 2 matches, I think Ravi Jadeja comes out of this test looking really good. And I think from now, for the next few years, even on a batting track, I think you've got to have Ravi Jadeja in there somewhere. And this is another thing Rishabh Pant having a great series gives them. If he can be a specialist bat, he could bat 6, Jadeja 7, Ashwin 8. And all of a sudden you've got 5 bowling options going into every test match, which is a pretty dream situation for any coach or captain. And speaking of captains, I think Ajinkya Rahane is another guy who has come out of this series looking really good. Everyone kind of just assumed when Kohli would leave that the wheels would fall off, but it was almost the opposite. Not that that's a personal attack at Virat at all. I think it was just a whole team thing really, but the way Rahane really led them, we saw some very interesting fields under his guidance. He seems to take the game on, and he seems to really think hard and long about how to get some of these Australian batsmen out, and he's very creative in the way he goes about it. And some of his tactical decisions, whether they were his or Ravi Shastri's, just seemed to pay off time and time again. And he also had a pretty solid season with the bat. In terms of an average of 38, he'd probably looking for a bit more than that, but when you consider it's against Australia, one of the best bowling attacks in the world, in Australia, one of the hardest places to bat for subcontinental batsmen, I think he had a pretty good series. And once again, like Jadeja, he was a huge reason why they won that test match in Melbourne with that match-winning century. So, yeah, he was 6 runs off India's top run scorer, but I think Rahane also had a really, really good summer in Australia, and he's not going to probably captain too many games into the future, if I'm honest, but they've shown that without Kohli, they've got a man sitting right there, capable, ready to go at all times. In terms of the Australian side, winners, look, Marnus had an absolute cracker of a series. He did only score 100, which would probably be a bit disappointing for him, considering how many starts he had, but over 400 runs at 53. He's just basically, once again, proven that his start to his career was not a fluke, and that he is seriously of this quality. He looks like a dead set top 5, if not higher, batsman in the world. He looks at a lot of the time as good as Smith, so can't really speak enough of Marnus in terms of that. He had a really good summer, so he was probably the blinding, shining light for Australia, next to probably Hazlewood and Cummins, who really, we'll talk about Lyon and Stark in a second, but they really had to carry the bowling attack, Hazlewood and Cummins, as they so often do. It's probably been overlooked at times how much, especially Hazlewood. I think Cummins gets the plaudits he deserves, but I think Hazlewood sometimes goes under the radar, but Stark and Lyon's lack of form of late, I think, has really shown how good of a test cricketer Josh Hazlewood really is. 17 wickets at an average of 19. It's pretty impressive against a really top quality batting lineup. But yeah, that's probably all we can say about Australia. Smith had a few good innings. Payne showed resilience quite often, but still didn't get that century he so badly wants. Cameron Green, not so much with the ball, but with the bat, he had a pretty good start to his career. He made 150, but scored over 200 runs for the summer. But yeah, sadly, when we're talking about Australia, we're probably going to be talking more about biggest losers. For me, the biggest losers are Stark and Lyon. Pretty much everyone in the Australian media and public is calling for their heads. People don't want to see them picked in the team in South Africa, which I think is going to be a real interesting thing to watch out for. They seem like two real big characters in the dressing room. Lyon has been there. He's one of the longest serving players, if not the longest. He leads the song, which is a really big thing in Australian cricket. Stark seems like he's kind of the captain of that bowling group, I'd say, in terms of he seems like a big talker and stuff like that. And he seems to, he's always a big presence in the media. So it's going to be interesting to see whether they have the balls to drop those two. They did have horrific summers, averages of over 40. Nathan Lyon took only 9 wickets in 187 overs. When you compare that to Jadeja, who took 7 wickets in 37 overs, that's basically speaks for itself. So they're probably the two biggest losers, I think. We'll get on to who could replace those two moving on, but I'll be honest, I don't actually know if they're going to get dropped. I think Stark, just because Hazlewood and Cummins are so reliable, I think Stark will get dropped because that's a pretty safe play from Australia. But I'm not sure if they have the balls to drop Nathan Lyon. I think going in with another spinner would be a huge risk, and I'm definitely not against it. I would love to see it, but I do think they will stick with Nathan Lyon for South Africa, but we'll see what they'll do there. And then my other biggest loser, it's probably got to be the rest of the Australian batting lineup, really. Labuschagne had a great summer. Smith was pretty good. Maybe not up to his lofty standards, but he was good. Payne was solid, didn't get that ton he was looking for. Pekoski, 50 on debut, that's pretty good. Green, his overall stats weren't bad, but if you looked at his individual innings, he showed glimpses of brilliance. But apart from that, that's where the issues are. There's just too much reliance on Labuschagne and Smith at the moment, and the fact that Pekoski and Green, two blokes in their first summers, had to kind of step up and fill the shoes of guys who weren't performing. We're looking at Travis Head, we're looking at Matthew Wade. They just didn't have good enough summers, really. I think Matthew Wade will be lucky to be playing in South Africa. I don't know why Matthew Wade is just beloved in Victoria, and there's something about it that everyone loves him here, but an average of 21 against what at times was India's 6th, 7th, 8th best pace bowlers, that's not good enough for Matthew Wade. And to me, it was more disappointing the way he was getting out. He was getting himself in and he was showing signs, and then he would just play an awful shot that just didn't belong on a test cricket field. He did that 3 or 4 times, so that was disappointing. Joe Burns, look, I feel a bit bad for Joe Burns because he probably shouldn't have been there in the first place, so he kind of just looked like a child swimming in an adult's pool. I don't know if that is a saying, but I've just whipped that out of my ass. Travis Head also got dropped, so he was a big loser. And Davey Warner is a bit of a surprising loser, but he didn't score a single 50 in 4 innings. He did look troubled from that injury most times, but it'll be a big series for him in South Africa, one of his favourite places to bat. If he goes and struggles there, all of a sudden questions probably will be raised about David Warner's career, as he is starting to get on in age and injuries might start to become more frequent, and that could start to see him slow down. But I think no one's really calling for his head at the moment. I think everyone's got to keep their cool. He has been a pretty reliable figure, especially at home. But that will be a big series for him in South Africa. So there's a lot to watch out for in South Africa with this Australian team. I'm going to go on to who could be brought into the side or the squad going to South Africa. But yeah, definitely a few big losers coming out of it for Australia. Now, moving on to the talking points coming out of the series, we just touched on a few of them there, but we're going to go a bit deeper into them now and the more general topics coming out of it. For me, this probably won't be discussed too much in the Australian media, as they will be focusing on Australia's disappointing result. But for me, this is the biggest interest I have coming out of this series is where does India go from here in terms of selection? We saw in that last test, I think they were missing 7 or 8 first choice players, really. They pretty much had a completely different bowling attack, and then they were missing Jadeja as an all-rounder and Rahul as a batsman and Kohli as a batsman, so they were missing plenty. And they have 2 big series. They host England in a 4-match series in March, and then they go to England in a 5-match series in August, I believe. And I'm not sure if there's any test cricket in and around that, but they're the main ones they'll be looking at and I'll be looking at. But just talking about who is in the mix for them, really, if we're looking at the top of the order for India, it's going to be hard to not go with Shubman Gill again. Very different conditions going from Australia to India, and it's going to be hard to not pick Agarwal and Sharma, as they've both been in pretty good form in the last 2 years. They're both in the top 5 run scorers for India in the last 2 years, but for me, you've got to have Gill up there in that first test against England in India. I think he just showed so much promise this series in tough batting conditions against a strong bowling attack. And I think he pretty much showed us he has all the shots, all the tools to be a quality test cricketer for India. And yes, I do believe too much focus is put on these youngsters and they are brought into the team too early. But when you've shown that much potential in your first real series as a start, I think he's got to be given about a year or so of guaranteed cricket at that opening spot, because I don't think you can be playing around with him and moving up and down, if I'm honest. So for me, the first opening spot has got to go to Shubman Gill. Then the next one is probably the tough one. You're looking at, your choices are really between Agarwal and Rohit Sharma. Rohit Sharma has averaged over 60 since the start of 2019, which is pretty incredible. However, he has not had that much success in his whole test career, but they've kind of rejuvenated him up the top of the order. Yes, he didn't have the greatest series in Australia here, only averaging around 30, but I'd probably go with him over Agarwal. Agarwal has scored a lot of runs. He's India's second highest run scorer since the start of 2019, but at a significantly lower average. And a lot of those runs came against Bangladesh, I believe. I think he scored a double ton there. So for me, I'm going with Shubman Gill and Rohit Sharma, just like they did here. Very attacking combination, but I think they are the best 2 men for the job. Then 3, 4, 5 picks itself, really. I don't think there's too much conversation to be had. You've got to go Pujara at 3, Kohli at 4, Rahane at 5. And then 6, I think you've got to go Rishabh Pant. He hasn't had the greatest test cricket career so far, but what he showed in Australia, I think you've got to move forward with him at number 6, which does mean I'm probably leaving Mayank Agarwal out of my team, which is pretty tough and it's pretty stiff. But and I can't lie, Pajara's not been that good since the start of 2019, only averaging 31, but there's not too many other guys for the job. Washington Sundar was good on debut, but I think he's got to bide his time a little bit. Vihari has never really taken his chance when he's been given it, so for me, I'm sticking with Pujara, Kohli, Rahane. It has been working. And then I'm going Pant at 6. He will also take the gloves. Then 7, I'm looking at Jadeja. I think, he's averaged over 50 with the bat since the start of 2019, so that speaks for itself, really. And then with the ball, he has been impressive. Not as good as Ashwin, but he's still been impressive. He gets significantly less overs and usually comes on when they need a partnership to be broken. So he usually undesirable spells, but he does what he can with it, and he does usually pretty well. So I'm going Jadeja at 7. I'm going Ashwin at 8. I think he's actually still been pretty good recently. Like, I don't think that's really a negotiable spot there. I think Ashwin's got to be there at 8. Then the pace bowlers, this is where it's really tough. We're looking at Ishant Sharma, Umesh Yadav, Mohammad Shami, Jasprit Bumrah, and now Mohammad Siraj. Can't say Shiraz because, I don't want to make jokes because he might have actually got racially abused, but that's apparently what they were calling him. Natarajan, he only played 1 test, so I'm probably not going to be considering him. Saying he didn't have a great start to his test cricket career here, so I'm probably going to be leaving him out as well. And Shadul Thakur, he played well, but I'm going to leave him out for now. So it's down to Siraj, Bumrah, Shami, Yadav, Sharma. Now this was really tough because I really liked what I saw from Siraj. He looked like he had the goods. Oh, this is real tough. I'm under the spot here. Bumrah's a lock. You got to have Bumrah in there, and I think you got to have Shami in there. So, because I do believe they are the 2 most talented bowlers out of that lineup, and Bumrah's only played a handful of tests, but he's been a world beater since he's played, so he's got to be in there. And Shami has shown over the last 3 or 4 years that he's one of the more reliable bowlers in test cricket. So that leaves me Ishant Sharma, Yadav, and Mohammad Siraj. I'm picking Mohammad Siraj. Ishant Sharma's been on fire since the start of 2019, average of around 15, so it's very tough to leave him out, but I think he could be considered coming in for England. He moves the ball a lot, so I think maybe in India I'm going Siraj, and then England we would look to go Ishant Sharma, or think of a way to get 4 pace bowlers in there. It's very stiff on Umesh Yadav, who is probably in the form of his career at the moment, but he's really just got unlucky with his timing. He's hit form when 4 or 5 other blokes have, but I honestly can't bring myself to dropping Mohammad Siraj after what he put up. He basically took over as leader of an attack in Brisbane, and he put on a stellar show. So I don't feel comfortable leaving him out. So I'm going Siraj, Shami, and Bumrah, and unfortunately Ishant Sharma and Umesh Yadav, they're going to be running the drinks for me, and Sharma could be looking to come in for the England series in England. So yeah, that's the tough one. That's the main interesting spot I'm looking at. Who do they pick as that third seamer? I do believe Shami and Bumrah, you've got to pick them. But after that, Sharma, Yadav, or Siraj, that's going to be interesting to see where they go with that. So that's where I think the future of Indian cricket lies, with that 11. But they've got great squad depth now. Blokes like Washington, Sundar, Agarwal, they're missing out on my side, but they have shown a lot in the last, when they've been given their chance. So Indian cricket's getting pretty scary with how good they are becoming. Honestly, in 5 years, I think it's going to be a rare occasion that we ever see India lose in any format. But yeah, it was good to see, as I don't really like Australia, if I haven't said that already in this podcast. So I was pretty pumped to see them lose. But that's what I think the first test lineup should be against England in India. It's going to be interesting to see what they go with, the selectors. I know there's a lot of politics involved in Indian cricket. But moving on to Australia. Right, if we look at the Australian side now, I'm thinking of South Africa first test match. I'm probably going to have some controversial opinions here, just because I'm looking at this basically from a stats point of view. There's a lot of Australian cricketers that I'm not a big fan of, but I'm going to be try and be impartial here. Opening the batting, I think you've got to have Warner and Pekovsky. Warner, yes, there are a few people calling for his head, like my mum, even though he only played 4 innings this year, and 2 of them were basically without a groin. I'm not a big fan of David Warner. I won't use the word hate, as my mum taught me that word has a big impact on people, but I'm not a fan at all. I don't really rate him as a bloke, even though I don't know him. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of the way he goes about his cricket, but I think you do have to have him there up the top. You've got to have some sort of consistency. I don't think you can be rolling into South Africa with Bukowski having played one test and then a new opener trying to find their feet. So I think Warner's up there in the top. He's averaged over 47 in the last 2 years, so he's certainly not there because of nothing, really. He's been pretty successful over time, and he likes the conditions in South Africa, similar to some of the Australian pitches. I do think you've got to have Bukowski there. What he showed in his first test, he just looked to be a test cricketer, really. The form he's had in the Sheffield Shield, it was only 2 or 3 matches that he played, but the consistency that he showed, I think you've got to be rolling into the first test in South Africa with him opening it up with Warner. Then 3 and 4, Labuschagne Smith, not even really worth mentioning, probably the 2 best batsmen in world cricket right now. That's actually savage for me. Kano's been in great form, and we haven't seen Virat for a while, but I'll say I think they are 2 of the best, and they are obviously the 3 and 4 for the Australian cricket team. Now 5's where it gets interesting, because I think Matthew Wade batted at 5 in the last test, if I believe, but he is realistically, in his last 14 test matches, he's averaged 31, so he's dropped for me. He probably makes a squad, but I don't care about the squad. Guys, you'd be looking at Khawaja. There's people calling for him to come back into the team. There's also calls for blokes like Nick Maddison, maybe even a Curtis Patterson to come back in the side, but I'm actually going for someone who just got dropped. He didn't have a great summer at all, but if you just look at his statistics from the last 2 years, it's probably stiff that he got dropped in the first place, and it's Travis Head. 20 innings, he scored 794 runs at an average of 44, 200s, 450s, so a few bigger scores would be appreciated from the Australian selectors, but someone averaging 44 at number 5 is certainly nothing to scoff at. I think Australia sometimes, as a cricket country, gets a little bit obsessed and wants every batsman to be averaging over 50, but that's just not going to happen. Usually each generation, you're probably lucky to have 2 blokes average over 50, and we've got Labuschagne and Smith in Australia. So I think Warner with an average of 47, Head with an average of 44, I think you are 100% taking them in your side to complement Labuschagne and Smith. So I'm actually rolling him with Travis Head at number 5. It's controversial, also can bowl a few tweakers as well, but I'm not really factoring that in. I'm not going to take into account age, because I do hate how often age is taken into account, but he still does have time, so I think it's worth him having another crack at it. And then all-rounder spot, Australia loves an all-rounder, and I think you've got to stick with Cameron Green. I don't think he's had enough tests to drop him. Yes, his bowling's a bit of a worry, the fact that he hasn't taken a wicket, but I think it's worth giving him a crack on a bouncy track in South Africa. I think his height should be quite useful, and with the bat, he showed signs in this test series on multiple occasions, so I think he's definitely deserving of his spot. Tim Payne is the captain. I don't know if he really deserves to be there, but he's going to get picked, so not really much point having a conversation about it. Now, looking at the bowlers, I haven't said too much controversial at the moment. Basically, the only interesting things are Head at 5 and Bukowski back up the top, opening with Warner. The bowlers, I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of Mitchell Starc. I don't rate him from the eye test, but if you look at his stats, it is hard to ignore. The last 24 months, he's had a bowling average of under 23, and he's had a better strike rate than Paddy Cummins. And I know he often gets brought up onto bowl against the tail, but I think, I don't want to say it, but I think he's got to be there. It's outrageous from me, and I was saying only earlier in the podcast that I do think he might be the sacrificial lamb for this bowling unit, and I do think Jai Richardson or James Pattinson will play the first test instead of him. But if I'm the selector, I'm picking Starc based on these statistics. He also had a pretty solid Shield campaign to start the year off. He played 2 matches, bowling average of under 30 in tough bowling conditions, and strike rate of 50, which was the 6th best in the competition. So I'm picking Starc I'm also picking Paddy Cummins and Josh Hazlewood. They're both there. Two world-class bowlers. So, yes, it's controversial. The pace bowling attack didn't get it done in this test series, but I'm going with them again, despite me not being a big fan of Stark. I think their statistics have earned them another crack at it. I'd give Stark another 2 tests in South Africa to see how he goes, and then maybe look to bring in Paddo or Richardson for that last test. The spinning options, though, are making a change there. Nathan Lyon, bowling average of 32, strike rate of 69 in the last 2 years. I'm sorry, I don't think he's going to get dropped, but I'm dropping him. And this is tough because we haven't seen any other spinners given a crack in an Australian outfit, so we're going to have to base it off Sheffield Shield performances. And based off that, it's got to be the man who was in the bubble this whole time, Mitchell Swepson. In his 3 games in the Shield earlier this year, he had a bowling average of 21. He was in the top 10 for strike rate. He took 3 fifers, so he was bowling Queensland to victory on a couple occasions. And I think Mitch Swepson's the one I want to be there. I do often prefer wrist spinners to finger spinners as well, so Swepson's got that going for him. And yeah, I think Mitchell Swepson should be the number 10 for Australia in the first test over Nathan Lyon. And yeah, that's controversial. I don't think it will happen because Nathan Lyon's a bit of a cult hero in Australia, but I do think he's a severely overrated cricketer and he's probably been given too many tests. He's won Australia a couple tests here or there, but I'm going Mitch Swepson. I'm giving the young fella a crack. After all, he has had to quarantine with the Australian cricket team for 2 months and has not been given a crack, so also a bit of a reward there, I reckon. But it would be interesting to see how he goes. Not spin-friendly conditions in South Africa, but I think why not throw him right into the deep end, see if he sinks or swims. Now, finally, I'm just going to quickly touch on the Cricket Australia calendar before we sign off on episode 100 of the On The Ball podcast. It's a tough topic because we aren't privy to the numbers that Cricket Australia are, and it's easy to be a couch. What do they call it? A couch expert, armchair expert, I think is what they call it. But I think changes have to be made to Australian cricket. I think the fact that the test matches run at the same time as the Big Bash just makes zero sense to me. The fact that Ben McDermott goes and scores 96 in the Big Bash and then people are convinced he could be a number 5 for the Australian cricket team in test matches is a concern, and I think it's pretty stupid, really. So I think changes have to be made there. I think the Sheffield Shield has to be running while the test matches are running, so Australia has a pool of players to pick from, can see who's in form as such, and it'll actually be just more interesting to watch. It'd give more relevance to the Shield matches. People would be tracking the scores, seeing who's going well, seeing who could potentially move into a spot into the test team. So what I'm proposing is either a Big Bash shift forward to October or Big Bash go January. And because they often want to line up the school holidays, I'm going to say Big Bash starts in January. I think the tests, well, they do. I'm not going to adjust the test schedule because it's kind of set in stone, but basically from mid-November to the start of January or the first week of January is the test matches. So I'm going to be running the Shield from the start of, or maybe even late October, right through to probably Christmas is when I'd stop them because they don't really need to be playing through the final test. So I think the end of October to Christmas is when the Shield should be played. And yes, I know it's not going to be a big money maker in December for Australian cricket, but this is just looking at it from a purely logical standpoint in terms of on-field success. So I think the Shield should be played from the end of October to December. Then you play the Big Bash in January and you really shorten it down. 14 games is ridiculous. I've actually been really into the Big Bash this year, and even the last couple games I've fallen away from it because at this point you're just watching so many games. They just all blend into one, really. So I think it should be shortened. Each team plays each team once, and then you have your final series. Get that done in a month. Bang. That's done. And then you can play your T20 internationals. You wouldn't play it during it, so the guys can play Big Bash, but you'd maybe play it after, at the start of February, as people are going back to school, and that can round off a good cricket season, which means the one days I'm actually opting for the one days to be before the Test series, and then you can play your one day cup, similar to the way the Shield. I'm saying the Shield should run just a bit ahead of it. So I'd say start this cricket season with the one day cup, September 1 or whenever the cricket season starts. Actually, that's still footy, so yeah, well, no one watches the one day cup anyway, so that can start in mid-September, roll that right through to the end of October, and then you can play your one day internationals in late October to early November. Then you start your Test cricket in mid-November, as the Shield's already started in late October, and that way, at all times in every single format, the selectors have a relevant set of statistics to choose their players from. Like, I'm looking at these Shield stats right now for South Africa. This happened 3 months ago. So it's pretty outrageous picking a spinner from this Shield thing, but that's what we have to do right now. And it's just so illogical. It's so stupid. I know it's done for financial reasons, that the Shield has to be on, that the Big Bash has to be on during the Christmas New Year period, but I can't see why there would be too much of a financial dip if it was just played in January, because that's the bulk of the tournament is still played in January, so I can't see why the Shield can't run it to the end of December. And yeah, that's just what I believe should happen. Yes, in an ideal world, the BBL would be played in October. We would pay the ICC to block out a month for us like the IPL does. We have access to every single international cricketer, as there's not much cricket going on in October, but I understand that is legitimately asking way too much of Cricket Australia. So I think we've just got to settle for January. Understand we're probably not going to get the big names, but then you get to see a few local talents, young guys giving it a crack. And yeah, I think we just go from there. But the main point of this is the Shield has to be running, or at least close to, the Test cricket, because I'm honestly sick of because I'm at my wit's end of hearing people being put into the Test selection picture off BBL innings. So yeah, sorry for that kind of unstructured rant there at the end. I just felt like I needed to get that off my chest, and what better place to do it on my podcast. So that's the end of episode 100. I just want to say a quick thank you to anyone who's ever listened to any of the episodes, or watched any of the videos on YouTube, or followed us on Instagram, anything. I really appreciate it. This is just a fun little passionate project on the side for me, and I don't take it too serious, but any support that is shown is always nice, because I do put in a lot of effort into it. So yeah, I really appreciate that support back. I appreciate anyone who's ever helped me out with any of the episodes, whether it just be giving me a few ideas, or whether they've joined me on an episode or something like that. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate anyone who's ever complimented me on it. I get a lot of compliments in person, which I really appreciate. I'm sure some are kind of taking the piss, but I'll take anything I can get at this point. So yeah, hopefully one day we'll be sitting here with many more milestones to come. Episode 150, episode 200. Who knows, maybe even an episode 1000 we'll be in a studio somewhere in the Melbourne CBD or something like that. But I don't know. But yeah, really appreciate it. It's been a real fun journey, and I'm looking forward to many more good times on this podcast. It should go up and up in 2021, especially now that, the whole lockdown situation in Melbourne for now is kind of eased. So we'll be doing more in-person podcasts, better equipment, better mics, better cameras. So hopefully everything is going up and up, and we can produce some pretty good content for your entertainment, viewing and listening pleasure. But for now, that's me checking out. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I guess I'll see you guys soon. Cheers.